Two U.S. F-15Es carried out a strike in Syria where they destroyed a weapons cache that was linked to Iran. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is said to have maintained that weapons facility, and that facility itself is most likely responsible for some of the attacks that have been carried out on U.S. troops over the last couple weeks. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement, "The precision self-defense strike is a response to a series of attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria by the IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or Quds Force affiliates." Now, Iran has a lot of different militias that they support. You could think of it kind of like mercenaries for hire. Iran has created these different proxy armies where they can basically say, oh, we're not sure exactly what's going on. So it's essentially like creating some sort of plausible but deniability. But at the end of the day, it is clear that Iran is backing these militias. And this is the US stepping in and saying, Iran, you can only go so far, and we're not going to allow you to attack US forces. We're going to target the different strategic areas where you are holding weapons and keep you from using those weapons against US forces. So it's essentially like the US is utilizing their self-inherent right to self-defense, and they're trying to send a clear message to Iran. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin continued, "The president has no higher priority than the safety of US personnel, and he directed today's action to make clear that the United States will defend itself, its personnel, and its interests. The United States is fully prepared to take full necessary measures to protect our people and our facilities." He added, "We urge against any escalation." Now, obviously the goal is to not have escalation. If you remember, a member of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps who was a general was targeted in Iraq a few years ago. The reaction that Iran had to that was to send missiles that hit very close to military bases owned by the United States in Iraq. Now, even though that these missiles didn't hit those bases, this was Iran's retaliation, trying to say, hey, there will be some consequences if you attack the generals who are attacking US forces. What happened out of that was multiple US service members suffered injuries, but no deaths. So it begs the question, what is Iran going to do for escalatory responses after this attack on their weapons cache in Syria? Well, it seems that they are going to shoot down a drone, since that is what happened a few hours ago. And I'll do a video on that drone being shot down. It was an MQ-9 Reaper shot down near Yemen, and that video will come up right after this. So don't forget to check out that video. A senior US military official added in that on Wednesday, that facility, which was located in Mausolin in Deir ez-Zor, Syria, is believed to have housed weapons used in many of the strikes that have taken place against US forces here in the region, in Syria, and throughout the Middle East. So not just localized to Syria, but these arms from this cache were potentially transported into other areas and used to attack bases in other areas of the Middle East. That senior US military official went on to provide even more information on the subject. They said, "We've been watching it for a bit," talking about that weapons cache, "to ensure that when we struck the weapons cache, we would strike it at a time that we would be able to eliminate the use of the facility to the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps." This US official said that they actually watched the engagement. They could have watched it from the Situation Room. They could have watched it at the NSA, the National Security Agency. They could have also watched it through remote access. There's remote access locations in places like Creech Air Force Base and all around the US where some drones are operated. And that US official goes on to say, "I watched the engagement, and I can tell you that we're pretty certain there were some secondary explosions that indicated the facility was housing weapons that we believed are likely used in many of the strikes that have taken place against our forces here in the region." And from a personal perspective, I've taken out weapons caches during combat sorties, and you definitely see secondary explosions, and usually they are quite obvious. I mean, think of shooting a missile or dropping a bomb, something going into something on the ground that is full of other missiles and bombs. It's going to light off like a fireworks factory, and you're going to see different rockets shooting out from all over that location. So taking out a weapons cache can definitely be one of the most obvious things that happens. And sometimes targets are taken out that you didn't know were weapons caches, but then you find out later due to all the secondary explosions that they were actually weapons caches. The US official went on to say that they did use the deconfliction line with Russia. And that's obviously one of the most intense scenarios that can happen is escalation with Russia and accidentally taking out Russian forces. There was a situation where Russian mercenary forces were taken out because they were amassing and getting ready to attack US troops in Syria. Whether or not they knew they were about to attack US troops is up for debate, but I've also got a video on that. It was a time when the US AC-130 gunship annihilated Russian forces, and you can check out that video. I'll link to it down in the description. And it's worth noting that the US speaks regularly with Russian counterparts to ensure deconfliction in the region and keep any unwanted escalation from happening where US and Russian forces are directly engaged in violence against each other. And this is obviously meant to keep a larger war from forming. So this strike itself was the second time that the US has had a strike in Syria against Iranian-backed militias. So throughout the Middle East, it's clear that escalations with Iran and the United States are escalating to almost an all-time high level. And on another personal note, I was able to protect the airspace in certain other countries against Iranian threats. And most likely there's the potential of seeing these Iranian threats start to step up, whether that's potentially fighter jets that they have, Russian-made fighter jets, old US F-14s that were sold to them back in the day, or most likely drones. And I'll do a follow-on video as well where I talk about an F-15E going up against an Iranian F-14 or an Iranian drone. And since this is the second time, the first time happened on October 26th, where a US F-15 and two F-16s used precision-guided munitions to strike two facilities linked to Iran-backed militias in eastern Syria. So operating in multi-ship formations with F-16s and F-15s are definitely one of the strengths of the US and NATO, since so many large force exercises are done with F-15Es, F-15Cs, and F-16s all working together. So potentially in that situation on the previous strike, if all those aircraft were involved, they're all going to have different mission sets. Maybe there's F-15Cs that are looking for any type of air threat. The F-15E can get really down in the weeds, low level if they needed to, but most likely they're operating somewhere in the 20 to 25,000 feet range. They're really digging into the weeds on the target, finding the target, and then potentially passing target information to F-16s to release weapons themselves, or the F-15E being the bomb truck and missile truck that it is, potentially just dropping its own weapons. So having all those different aircraft in the Middle East, F-16s, F-15Cs, and F-15Es, and then most likely the F-15EX will probably see its first round of combat in Syria or in areas where Iranian-backed militias are creating more of these weapons caches, really just shows that deploying those F-15Es and those F-16s to the Middle East is really giving you a huge bang for your buck from a weapons perspective as far as air-to-air protection and air-to-ground weapons that can be used against these weapons caches. And the reason why attacks on these types of facilities are important is to keep weapons resources down for these Iranian-backed militias, which are essentially acting as terror groups in the Middle East. And just over the last month or so from the time of this video being published, there has been 41 recorded attempted attacks on US forces in the region. So if I was a betting man, I would bet that F-15Es and F-16s will be seeing a lot more action as more of these weapons caches are discovered. And again, this attack on this weapons cache comes at essentially the same time that a US MQ-9 Reaper drone was shot down in Yemen. So click on that video next and I'll give an update to that. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on that next video. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, please dominate the like button. That would just help the YouTube algorithm to put this video in front of more people, and it would help me grow this channel. And you could say hello on Patreon as well. Lots more content for you to check out over there. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.